The Central Intelligence Agency, known simply as the CIA, is one of the most powerful and secretive organizations in the world. Born out of the Cold War, its purpose was to defend American interests around the globe. But over the decades, the CIA has been accused of far more than just gathering intelligence. From engineering regime changes to experimenting with mind control, its fingerprints can be found on some of the most controversial events of the modern age. Let's begin with the origins. The CIA was created in 1947, during the early days of the Cold War. Through the National Security Act, the idea was to have a centralized agency responsible for gathering and analyzing foreign intelligence. But from the very beginning, the CIA had a more aggressive mission: covert operations. These were secret actions intended to influence political outcomes in other nations, often without any public knowledge. One of the first major covert operations was in Iran in 1953. The CIA helped orchestrate a coup against Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized Iran's oil industry. British and American oil companies were outraged, and the CIA stepped in. With a campaign of propaganda, bribery, and support for loyalist forces, the Shah of Iran was reinstated. This would mark the beginning of CIA involvement in regime change around the world. Just 1 year later, in 1954, the CIA turned its attention to Guatemala. Jacobo Arbenz, a democratically elected president, threatened U.S. business interests, especially those of the United Fruit Company. Labeling Arbenz a communist, the CIA organized Operation Pubsucks. They armed and trained opposition forces, spread disinformation, and forced Arbenz out of power. Guatemala fell into decades of civil war and brutal repression. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, the CIA became increasingly involved in Latin America. In Chile, the agency backed a coup against socialist President Salvador Allende in 1973. Allende had been elected democratically, but the U.S. feared his alliance with Marxist policies. The CIA supported General Augusto Pinochet, who seized power in a violent coup. Thousands of Chileans were tortured, disappeared, or killed during his dictatorship. These were not isolated incidents. The CIA played similar roles in Brazil, Congo, Indonesia, and Nicaragua. Often, the justification was to prevent the spread of communism. But the result was usually the same: dictatorships, human rights abuses, and long-term instability. But regime change was just one side of the CIA's secret war. Another was Operation MKUltra, a dark chapter in history that involved human experimentation without consent. Starting in the 1950s, the CIA wanted to discover if it was possible to control the human mind. They used LSD, hypnosis, electroshock, and sensory deprivation on thousands of unsuspecting people. Some were prisoners, others were psychiatric patients, and even American citizens. The goal: to create super spies, erase memories, and develop mind control techniques. One of the most infamous cases was Frank Olson, government scientist who was secretly drugged with LSD by the CIA and later fell to his death from a hotel window. His family believes he was murdered. MKUltra operated for 2 decades, until it was finally exposed in the 1970s. And even then, much of the evidence was destroyed. Alongside MKUltra was another powerful tool of influence: Operation Mockingbird. This secret campaign aimed to infiltrate and control major media outlets. The CIA recruited journalists, editors, and broadcasters in both the U.S. and abroad. These operatives would publish stories that aligned with U.S. foreign policy goals or suppress those that didn't. News was no longer just news. It became a weapon of psychological warfare. The CIA's reach into media was vast. Reporters from big-name outlets like the New York Times, CBS, and Time magazine were alleged to have worked with or reported to the CIA. In other cases, the agency would fund cultural magazines, radio programs, and even movies to spread anti-communist and pro-American messages around the world. The line between fact and propaganda became dangerously blurred. As we move into the 1980s, the Iran-Contra affair revealed just how far the CIA was willing to go. The U.S. secretly sold weapons to Iran, spite an arms embargo, and used the proceeds to fund right-wing Contra rebels in Nicaragua. Congress had banned such funding, but the CIA helped find a workaround. The scandal broke in 1986, and deeply damaged the credibility of the U.S. government. By the 1990s, the Cold War had ended, but the CIA's covert activities continued. After 9/11, the CIA took on a new mission: fighting terrorism. But even here, controversy followed. The agency ran secret prisons, known as black sites, where suspects were detained without trial and subjected to enhanced interrogation. Techniques, a term many critics say is simply a euphemism for torture. The CIA also conducted targeted drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. These strikes often killed suspected terrorists, but also resulted in civilian casualties. Critics argue that such tactics breed more extremism, not less. In recent years, attention has turned to cyber operations and surveillance. The CIA, along with the NSA, has faced backlash for spying on both foreign governments and American citizens. Whistleblowers like Edward Snowden exposed programs that monitored emails, phone calls, and internet activity on a massive scale. The CIA's involvement in foreign elections is also a growing concern. There are allegations that the agency has tried to influence votes in Ukraine, Venezuela, and even European countries. While the U.S. condemns election interference by other nations, its own intelligence operations often cross similar lines. Despite all these controversies, defenders of the CIA argue that many of its actions have protected American lives and interests. They point out that the world is full of threats, and covert operations are sometimes necessary. The real debate lies in the balance between national security and ethical responsibility. The story of the CIA is not just about espionage, it's about power, secrecy, and the manipulation of truth. It's about how one agency helped shape the modern world. It's often behind the scenes, with consequences that are still unfolding today. From overthrowing governments to conducting mind control experiments, and from controlling the press to running secret wars, the CIA's legacy is complex and deeply controversial. Some see it as a protector, others as a puppet master. But one thing is clear: the CIA has changed the modern world, and in doing so, it has forced us to ask uncomfortable questions about who really holds power and how far they are willing to go to keep it.